Good afternoon. Please take your seats. I call the meeting of the General Committee on Political Affairs and Security to order. I'll begin our meeting again with a few administrative remarks. Can I remind everyone to please silence your mobile phones. Let me also remind anyone who plans to speak from a prepared text to please provide the text to the Secretariat, if at all possible, so that our interpreters will have an easier time. Colleagues, the draft agenda of this meeting has been circulated. It should be in front of you. Could I please invite you to adopt this agenda? Are there any objections to the agenda as written? Seeing no objections, the agenda is adopted. Thank you. Colleagues, let me again welcome you back to our committee meeting, which has been extremely productive so far. Thank you all for your hard work and collegiality. As we begin the substance of this afternoon's session, we are honored to be joined by the Chairman in Office of the OSCE, the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Poland, His Excellency Zbigniew Rau. Minister, thank you. And I want to say, Minister, in the face of the extraordinary crisis in Europe and the global security caused by Russia's aggression against Ukraine, I want to thank you for your posture of, quote, no business as usual, end quote, for the OSCE governmental structures for the time being. The OSCE must remain dedicated to addressing the challenges of Russia's deliberate rejection of its commitments under the Helsinki Final Act and find ways to make a positive difference. Minister, while the OSCE was not able to prevent this awful war, we must now allow the finger to be pointed anywhere but at the aggressor state. We must not allow that. Indeed, despite claims that it only sought dialogue, Moscow spurned the process you launched, the renewed European security dialogue, rejecting the very dialogue it supposedly was calling for. Please know you have the full support of this body as the chairmanship seeks to protect the commitments at the heart of our organization and ensure the OSCE is able to continue delivering value on behalf of all of our citizens. The OSCE has been a force for good, and particularly for the protection and promotion of human rights. We must do what is possible to safeguard this valuable legacy for the future. I now understand that our president would also like to offer a few remarks. We are honored that you've joined us, Madam Setterfeld, and I will now give you the floor. Please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair Richard Hudson. Dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, I am very pleased that we today are joined by OSCE Chairperson in Office, Minister of Foreign Affairs, Mr. Zbigniew Rau. We are aware that chairing OSCE these days during the war in Ukraine, Russia's war in Ukraine, is a very difficult task. It's a challenge. But I also understand it's not only those issues you have on your table. It's all 57 OSCE countries. And it must be very busy and demanding. So we are extremely pleased that you took your time, Mr. Chairperson in Office, to come here to our annual session, the first one since 2019, to address us and also to take time for a few questions. It means a lot for us as parliamentarians, but I am convinced that it also is very positive for the OSCE body as a whole. And it also shows the importance of cooperation. And I must say, as President of OSCE PA, I appreciate the cooperation with the Chairperson in Office of OSCE very much. And I also appreciate the cooperation between our Secretariat and the Chairperson in Office Secretariat. It's important with international cooperation. It's important with cooperation of the leadership from OSCE and the Parliamentary Assembly. I am very pleased for that. But now I will not talk any longer because we are here to listen to OSCE Chairperson in Office, Zbigniew Rau. Please, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, Secretary General, distinguished members of the OEC Parliamentary Assembly, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. My first address to the OEC Parliamentary Assembly as the organization's chair took place on February 24th. Back then, we have already understood the gravity of that dark hour in our history. However, we probably could not fully grasp the longer-term consequences of the war that started on that day. As events unfolded, the world was shocked by the scale of the brutality of the invading forces. Attacks against civilian infrastructure, use of illegal weapons, stealing and plundering, rape, execution-style murders committed in cold blood. We had thought these immoral and barbaric instruments for waging war belonged to the past. Sadly, we were wrong. Bucha, Irpin, Borodianka, Kremenchuk, and other places will go down as marks of shame for the aggressor who shows no respect for human life or human dignity. We remember the victims as well as we will remember their sacrifice and what they stood and died for. The crimes committed against the Ukrainian state and its people deserve our the strongest condemnation. Those responsible for the war crimes will be brought to justice. Ever since the war started, we have all been wondering what it means for us, for our societies, for the organization that we are representing. An organization that was meant to prevent a major military confrontation in the European continent. I believe that we are now at the turning point of history. We should know that we will be considered by the future generation not by what we identified as the problem. We will be judged by how we responded to the challenges and whether or not we managed to avoid the worst-case scenarios. In fact, the world is at one of these decisive moments in its history. More than ever, politicians and parliamentarians alike face uncertainty about the future. And the future will be defined either by our ability to be guided by universal rules founded in our humanity, or by the whims of darker, more powerful, and mighty forces. I hope that the whole OEC community will draw the necessary conclusions to return to and then strengthen a rules-based order in Europe. The international laws enshrined in the UN Charter and reflected in the Helsinki Final Act and the Charter of Paris for a New Europe are our signposts. Now, with the war in Ukraine, we can see the tragic consequences of disregarding this legal foundation and framework of civilized behavior. Time and again, we have rejected any return to the concept of spheres of influence where might makes right. And we are right in demanding respect for the basic principles of international law, which are the foundation of peaceful coexistence amongst nations. The Russian aggression against Ukraine, supported by Belarus, calls into question our European security system that was built after the end of the Cold War. By launching a full-scale war against Ukraine, Russia has demonstrated that it's neither capable of nor interested in continuing as a part of a rules-based European security system. Instead, Russia sees that system as a construct to be targeted. Given the non-compliance with the OSCE principles and commitments by one of its stakeholders, the future of the organization depends on how effectively we are able to revive cooperation between participating states. The question remains, can we, and if so, how, reach consensus about our main priorities and create a proper modern modus operandi to carry out the OSCE's mandate? I believe that the OSCE remains the right forum to discuss all aspects of European security. We should be able to leverage the organization's unique and inclusive character to increase security and stability in the OSCE area. However, it is up to Russia to make the strategic choice, either to embark on a path of peaceful cooperation or continue with its neo-imperial aggressive posture, which ultimately is doomed to failure. In the meantime, we will protect and continue the OSCE's work beyond Ukraine, in places like Moldova, the South Caucasus, the Western Balkans, and Central Asia, where the OSCE continues to facilitate dialogue conducive to peaceful resolution of conflicts. We will support and promote the political and economic reforms which are the cornerstone of stability and create a framework for sustainable development. Looking ahead, the Chair will actively support initiatives to advance the OSCE's goals. We should continue to earn the trust that the OSCE has built over years among people living in conflict zones. Our commitment to human rights is unwavering. I am guided by Václav Havel's words. He said in 1991, quote, "Human rights are universal and indivisible. Human freedom is also indivisible. If it is denied to anyone in the world, it is therefore denied indirectly to all people." This is why we cannot remain silent in the face of evil or violence. Silence merely encourages them. Quote end. Please, let us remember these words when we think of the Ukrainian nation terrorized and victimized by this war. We remain committed to ensuring the OSCE continued presence and support to Ukraine. Given the dire humanitarian situation on the ground, together with Secretary General, we have taken steps to identify safe ways to keep the OSCE structures actively supporting the humanitarian effort. We deeply regret Russia's position that prevented the extension of the mandates of both the Special Monitoring Mission and the Project Coordinator in Ukraine. For the last 8 years, the Special Monitoring Mission was eyes and ears of the international community on the ground. The team of the Project Coordinator in Ukraine continued its important work despite the ongoing aggression. I am grateful for their dedication and commitment in these extraordinary circumstances. We all should do our best to ensure the OSCE presence and its crucial work in Ukraine to continue. Ladies and gentlemen, resolve and clarity of purpose are key to defending our values and principles. To this end, we should reaffirm our unity and work tirelessly to build resilience in the face of the current threat. I believe in the value of our partnership within the OSCE and with the organization's Parliamentary Assembly. They enable us to join forces in the defense of our common values. I commend President Zenfeld's strong leadership in this regard. And I look forward to working with the OSCE Parliamentary Assembly and with all of you, distinguished members. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Minister Rao. We are honored that you've made time to be with the committee this afternoon. I currently have 13 speakers, members who signed up to ask a question. We're not going to have time on this agenda item to get through all of those. I will take a few questions at a time and then allow the minister to respond until we reach that hard stop time. And because of that, we're going to limit questions to 1 minute so we can get as many in as possible. So I will now call on Mr. Reinhold Lopatka from Austria, the Special Representative for Parliamentary Dialogue on Ukraine, to ask a question. Mr. Lopatka, you have the floor.
Yeah, dear Foreign Minister Rao, dear Chairperson Hudson, I try to be short and precise. Thank you very much for your holistic and clear description of the situation in Ukraine. I totally agree with you. You mentioned OSCE is the right forum to discuss all questions of security in Europe. I have the feeling that in days like this, the parties to the conflict are not ready to talk about ending the war in any other way than on the battlefield. Foreign Minister Rao, I have a very concrete question, therefore. Do you see in near future any chance for diplomacy and political dialogue to end this war after the invasion of Russia on the 24th of February and to stop this killing of innocent people. Our colleagues from Ukraine mentioned 344 children already lost their life. This was 2 days before. Maybe until today, more children lost their life. Do we have any chance? Diplomacy has any chance? Do you see a role for you, especially in your position? Thank you.
Thank you for that question. I will now call on Mr. August Pfluger from the USA to ask a question. Mr. Pfluger, you have 1 minute.
Well, thank you, Foreign Minister Rao. Thank you for your comments and for your leadership. And we also want to thank you for appearing before the U.S. Helsinki Commission on the 3rd of February. That event was titled Poland's Leadership of the OSCE in Times of Crisis. As you've recently stated, Russia's unjust and unprovoked war of aggression against Ukraine has precipitated the most serious challenge to the European security architecture since the Helsinki Final Act was adopted, and everyday innocent lives are being lost. Your voice here at the OSCE Parliamentary Assembly is a powerful addition to our chorus of support to Ukraine and a denunciation of Putin. Russia has made it clear beyond a doubt that it has turned its back on our shared values, and for the foreseeable future, we will have to reckon with the consequences of Putin's decision to do so. Minister Rao, at this present moment, we believe one of OSCE's key contributions is to gather and preserve evidence of Russian atrocities through the Moscow mechanism, and I wanted to know your position on the actual utility of that and whether or not you believe OSCE can continue in a meaningful way that particular mission. Once again, you have our full support, and we appreciate your leadership in this very trying time. Thank you.
Thank you. And maybe I'll take one more and then let the minister respond. Ms. Farah Karimi from the Netherlands, you're recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you very much. Mr. Rao, thank you for your tireless work and your leadership. We agree, no business as usual. However, as Special Representative of OSCE PA on youth engagement, I would like to draw your attention to the position of youth in our region. The past 2 years have been extremely challenging. Multiple crises have threatened and continue to threaten the lives and the position of youth. The COVID-19 pandemic, the aggressive war of Russia, and atrocities against civilians, other violent conflicts in the region and neighboring countries, and climate change have huge impact on lives of our youth. Especially during these times of multiple crises, special attention should be paid to the needs of children and young people. Their voices must be heard in defining policies and political actions. I would like to ask you, Mr. Rao, are you ready to start drafting an OSCE youth strategy and action plan, which ideally would be adopted by the ministerial meeting in December this year? What are the intentions of Chairman in Office to increase youth engagement, and could he commit drafting such a strategy? Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mr. Rao, I give you the floor for a reply.
Well, thank you for all these 3 questions. Let's begin with the fundamental question that can be asked every diplomat. Do you see any chance for diplomacy in the context, political and military context that prevails now? So my question is that, first of all, we have to realize what is the true picture of this war. We have an aggressor and we have a victim. The aggressor has no right to commit the deeds it's committing. So there is no international law justification for the aggression. The victim has every right to defend itself. This is the cornerstone of the provisions of international law. The victim has every right to expect assistance and support on the part of those who believe that international law should prevail in international relations. Now, what is the role left for diplomats in such a situation? My answer is that it's up to the victim to decide when and under what circumstances, under what conditions the victim is ready to negotiate with the aggressor. The Ukrainians are paying the highest price right now for their national independence, state sovereignty, and territorial integrity. It's up to them to decide when diplomacy should be given a chance. And the commitment and the obligation of all of us, the diplomats, including those in this hall, because I'm very much in favor of parliamentary diplomacy, is to wait for the call from the Ukrainian side. Whenever they are ready, whenever they decide that the national interest is requiring diplomatic support and diplomatic intervention, we should be ready to act. As far as the Moscow mechanism is concerned, indeed, it's one of the instruments that the OSCE has at its disposal. We know very well that the organization, in order to function and to carry out its commitments, has to be based on a constant consensus of all participating states. We know very well that right now we cannot count on this kind of consensus, especially on the issue of Russian aggression against Ukraine. Nevertheless, the grave violations of international law and international humanitarian laws are taking place. So, if the organization is going to stay true and faithful to its basic mission, especially as expressed in the third dimension, and people of my generation used to call it third basket. I mean the protection of human rights, including the recording of the breaches of human rights. The Moscow mechanism, I would say, has proven to be an effective instrument, the one that is left to us. It would be a grave mistake, something that would be very difficult to explain to future generations if we decided not to use it as many times as it's needed and helpful. Now, turning to the position of the youth in our region, given the challenges of the pandemic of the war in Ukraine and all other conflicts, including the violent ones that have been taking place in our area. Indeed, you are absolutely right, ma'am, when you are saying that youth, young people are more exposed to the consequences of this phenomena more than the older generation. Let's focus for a moment on the war, or more generally on conflict zones. What is the result of this kind of horrifying experience? The collapse of the previous social structure, pulverization of society, atomization of society, and those who can refer to their rich life experience, I don't hesitate to say to their wisdom, are in a position to face such challenges in a much better, not to say safer way than the young people who still need stable, known and predictable social structure that they are part of. From such a structure, whether from their family, schools, I would add, religious organizations, local communities, they can expect the guidance in such difficult times. When all that is pulverized and at some places even gone, these young people are most exposed. And this is the most important thing that we have to keep in mind while talking about the position of the youth. Now, do I believe that such an action plan is advisable, necessary? Certainly it is. I suppose that we can agree upon it. So we have to join forces, not only of politicians and lawyers, because it's usually it's the easiest way to do, but we need here cooperation of community leaders, sociologists, social psychologists, teachers, and so on and so on. I believe it shouldn't be just, if I may say so, because my first nature is university professor, so I get excited when we are talking about this kind of projects. But I believe we should, thinking about this kind of action plan, first of all, we should take a very empirical approach. We should inquire on the spot what real problems are, then put them together, try to classify the issues that should be addressed, and then we should look for a solution. If we can even start working this way, we are already in the middle of success. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Minister. And dear colleagues, we still have a number of members who've requested to take the floor, but unfortunately we are out of the time that we've allotted for this agenda item. You may still put these questions to the chairperson in office in written form according to Rule 42.4 of our Rules of Procedure. With that, join me once again in thanking Minister Rao for your generous use of your time today. Thank you. The committee will suspend for about 2 minutes while we reset the head table, and then we'll reconvene. Thank you.
So now you can hear me? Well, thank you. We continue our works with the supplementary item, victims of terrorism, referred to us by the Standing Committee, which is supplementary item number 8. There are 3 amendments to this item. I give the floor to Mr. Lopatka from Austria, the sponsor of this draft resolution. Mr. Lopatka, please.
Thank you very much for giving me the floor. As you know, since 5 years, we have our ad hoc committee on countering terrorism, a very active committee. And we thought it is necessary to put the focus again on this issue. And so I hope when I present this supplementary item on victims of terrorism that you can support it. You know, after each terrorist attack, we often hear about those who carried it out. Their names may be broadcast, their pictures and videos are published on the internet, their stories are told, but we rarely hear about those who were killed and injured. Women, girls and boys who lives in a peaceful way and then their lives ended or are changed forever. Such shameful acts are intended to undermine the trust of our citizens in the public authorities and fuel animosity and hatred among our societies. While developing our strategies and programs, we should also realize that survivors of terror attacks play a key role in countering extremism and violence. First of all, they contribute to fighting the impunity of terrorists and extremist groups during the investigations, often providing key evidence for securing the conviction of the perpetrators. In addition, victims are extremely powerful and credible messengers. Their experiences put a human face to the impact of terrorism and help to counter the narratives of terrorists and violent extremists. Ultimately, by remembering all the victims of terrorism and supporting their loved ones, we are not only paying tribute to their human suffering, but also contributing to change those very narratives of fear and hatred that terrorists seek to incite within our societies. It is therefore key to address the complex needs of the victims of terrorism across the OSCE region and integrate such provisions into comprehensive counterterrorism policies at national level. This is the reason why our ad hoc committee on countering terrorism has developed a new draft resolution on the victims of terrorism. And once adopted, this document will provide a clear benchmark for the efforts of all our participating states in this critical field. So, colleagues, the OSCE has always advocated for the protection of rights and needs of victims of terrorism. And in these 5 years, we were able to work together with other interparliamentary forums and with the United Nations in this field. And recently, we published the UN model legislative provisions to support the needs and protect the rights of victims of terrorism. Beside these legislative provisions, our draft resolution draws upon previous OSCE BA resolutions, OSCE declarations, as well as UN General Assembly resolutions. And the resolution stresses the importance of upholding the human rights and fundamental freedom of victims, in particular to assistance, reparation, protective measures, information, and access to justice. The resolution also calls upon OSCE participating states to adopt comprehensive assistance plans for victims of terrorism. And finally, we encourage our participating states to establish permanent coordination bodies and multidisciplinary crisis response teams for victims of terrorism. In conclusion, I am convinced that this resolution will further the international counterterrorism framework, providing clear guidance for our participating states in supporting and upholding the rights of victims of terrorism. And therefore, I hope that all our colleagues can support this resolution, and this is the first step. And the second step, to get active on national level where it is necessary. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Lopatka. Now we open the debate. The time limit for speeches is 3 minutes. If there are lots of members wishing to speak, I may reduce the time limit to try to accommodate as many people as possible. Now I give the floor to Mr. Radoslaw Fogel from Poland. So, Mr. Radoslaw is not here. Next speaker, Ms. Pia Kauma from Finland.
Dear Chairperson, dear colleagues, as a member of the Ad hoc Committee on Countering Terrorism, I am often approached with a question: why does an MP from a Nordic country consider countering terrorism as an issue worth devoting time to? Our country has indeed been largely spared from terror attacks in the past. However, the past should not be used to predict the future. The terror attacks of July 2011 in Norway showed that we cannot exclude the possibility of terrorism anywhere. In 2020, the Ad hoc Committee on Countering Terrorism visited the Utøya Island and Oslo to pay tribute to the victims of these tragic attacks. One of the key lessons from the attacks in Norway, but also in several other places, has been that feelings of isolation and lack of prospects make individuals vulnerable to radicalization. Finland and other Nordic countries are not immune to this. Therefore, engaging in preventive action is vital. In addition to building societies where no one is left behind, it is necessary to see that our domestic counterterrorism laws are up to date. Counterterrorism legislation that is not up to date leaves greater space for terrorist activities. As laws in one country are made more robust, terrorist organizations move to countries where their room for maneuver is greater. Dear Mr. Speaker, in addition to preventive action, I would like to draw your attention to our main theme of this supplementary item, that is, the victims of terrorism. In discussions about dealing with the aftermath of terrorist attacks, the focus is often on authorities as the main, if not the sole actors. Having said this, we should not lose sight of the significant role of civil society that can play in countering terrorism and dealing with its effects. Associations of victims of terrorism bring invaluable expertise and insights to ensuring that the needs of victims are effectively met. They offer support groups, facilitate access to relevant information, and give psychological support to victims of terrorism. This is also the message that I highlighted at the high-level conference on parliamentary support to victims of terrorism in Rome, which I attended together with other CCT members in early June. We as parliamentarians have a role to play in facilitating their involvement in shaping strategies and programs aimed at ensuring that victims of terrorism get the support they need to return to normal life. Dear Mr. Chair, with these words, I express my full support for the adoption of this supplementary item. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Pia Kauma. continue our debates, and I will give the floor to Mr. Luis Grassa from Portugal.
I pass, Mr. President.
You pass. Thank you, Mr. Grassa. Now I will give the floor to Ms. Ellen Samin from Belgium.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Dear colleagues, let me start by stating our full support of preventing and combating terrorism in all its shapes and forms, striving towards a political goal by using violence, especially on innocent civilians, is one of the most gruesome acts any organization or individual can engage in. We are in all agreement on this here today, so I can say that our party fully supports this draft resolution in spirit. I do have some critical questions regarding to relocation of foreign terrorist fighters, as I think this is a very dangerous pathway to more terrorism on European soil. Our position is very clear on this. The perpetrators of ISIS terrorism, also the women, should be held fully accountable and face trial in the country where they committed their horrendous acts. These people have not rejected their radical ideology, and they proved this time and time again. Our justice systems aren't able to adequately punish them with long sentences, so they will already form a danger to national security within a few years' time. We put the rights of our innocent citizens above the rights of terrorists at all times. In regards to fighting international Islamic terror, we would like to point out that there must be more emphasis some states that pose a danger. We think of Iran, for example, an Islamic theocracy that uses its embassies and international terror groups to undermine our security. We saw this with the attacks on political opponents nearby Paris, organized by Iranian diplomat Assadullah Assadi. Right now, he's being detained by Belgium, but we are at the brink of legalizing a trade between him and the innocent Iranian-Swedish professor Ahmad Reza Jalali. This is playing into the hands of Iran, of course, because this is precisely their strategy. They use nationals with double nationalities by holding them hostage and asking for the returning of their terrorists on our soil. We can never go along with this Iranian agenda, and I think there must be more acknowledgement of the role of Islamic states like Iran in supporting global terrorism. We thank the United States in this case for criticizing the Belgian decision of legalizing trade between convicted persons because they see that this is rewarding the Ayatollah regime in Tehran. And that can never be the way to solve anything. It would actually be stimulating the international terrorist agenda of Tehran, because it would send the message that terror embassies can continue their work if they get caught. The perpetrators would be returned to Iran, completely escape justice. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you. Now I will give the floor to Ms. Grigorian from Armenia. You have the floor.
Thank you. Dear parliamentarians, while talking about terrorism and its victims, just like human rights, our approach cannot be selective. We cannot choose to voice about victims of terrorism in one area and choose to stay silent about others. I hence want to thank all colleagues from more than 10 countries who voted for the 3 amendments proposed by our delegation, referring to the need for a comprehensive resolution of the existing Nagorno-Karabakh conflict for the reason that people living there are victims of terrorism and war crimes who lack very basic security right now. Advocating that the conflict is over is basically making everyone in this room admit that indeed international law is dead. Moreover, I consider that voting to stay silent and admitting there is no more conflict leaves painful open questions, first being the security and rights of the people who still do live in Nagorno-Karabakh. The reality is that these people need a comprehensive resolution, as they have neither disappeared nor their security issues and rights have disappeared. When we let us say not to address these issues, we give green light to the actions that follow the words of Azerbaijani leader, and I quote, "I said, if Armenians do not leave our lands on their own will, we will chase them away like dogs." I still hope that nobody would want to find themselves in defending a policy that leads to the above actions till it's too late. Not learning lessons leaves us with guaranteed consequences of upcoming human tragedies, and no politics, no money for that reason can ever be valuable more than human lives. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you. Now I will give the floor to Mr. Andrei Coelho Lima from Portugal.
Dear Chairman in office and dear colleagues, we think that the main problem talking about victims of terrorism nowadays is to know who should we consider today a victim of terrorism. We have victims of terrorism everywhere and in all places. The terrorism notion or concept should nowadays involve those who are not fighting for national or religious causes, but also those who have particular or individual causes. The classical political agenda of terrorists or terrorism is, we think, outdated. We have nowadays all kinds of agendas that need our concern, that need our attention. So giving full support to this supplementary item, Portugal urges that international organizations, particularly OSCE, looks to this concept of terrorism in order to adapt to its manifestations nowadays. Thank you.
Thank you. Now I will give the floor to Mr. Eduard Ajayanian from Armenia.
I withdraw.
Thank you. Mr. Chair came back, so I will give him the floor. Mr. Chair, please.
Thank you, Mr. Donava. We're now moved to consideration of the amendments submitted to the draft resolution. Copies of the amendments have been made available. I'll call the proposer of the amendment first, and then we'll call any opponent of the amendment. I will then ask the sponsor of the draft resolution, Mr. Lopaka, for his opinion. I ask speakers to observe a time limit of 2 minutes. Following that, I shall put the amendment to the vote. Paragraphs 1 and 2, there are no amendments. We will take them together. Does anyone want to separate and vote on these paragraphs individually? Seeing not, we will take paragraphs 1 and 2 together. Those in favor, please raise your yellow placard. Okay, those against, please raise your placard. And abstentions, please raise your placard. Paragraphs 1 and 2 are agreed to. Thank you. I now call Mr. Vesey of the United States to propose Amendment 1, which adds a new paragraph after paragraph 2. Mr. Vesey, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Hudson. I have a couple of amendments here, and this is my first time on the Anti-Terrorism Committee. And looking forward to working with Mr. Lopaka. This amendment condemning all acts of terrorism, both international and domestic, in the OSCE region, which the Assembly noted at its 2021 annual session, has been on the rise. Terrorism is obviously a threat to peace, security, and stability and human rights and social and economic development. Citizens in the OSCE region and around the world deserve to live in a fulfilling life as free from fear of violence as it can be. And all people are equal and should not face increased violence based on race, nationality, geography, religion, or other differences that may exist. And I hope the Assembly will adopt my amendment so that we can condemn acts of terrorism and work to uphold the OSCE values that make our organizations so unique and important. With that, I yield back.
Thank you. Does anyone wish to speak against Amendment 1? What is Mr. Lopatka's opinion of the amendment?
I'm a co-sponsor of this amendment, so I support it.
Well, thank you. I shall now put Amendment 1 to a vote. Will all those in favor of Amendment 1 please raise your yellow voting card and hold it up in the air? Thank you. Those against, please raise your voting card. Are there any abstentions? Please raise your voting card. Thank you. Amendment 1 is adopted. There are no amendments to paragraphs 3 to 8. We will take them together. Does anyone want a separate vote on any of these paragraphs? So we will take together 3 to 8. Those in favor, please raise your yellow placard. Thank you. Those against, please raise your yellow placard. Any abstentions? Paragraphs 3 to 8 are agreed to. Now call Mr. Altanok from Turkey to propose Amendment 2.
Evet, Sayın Başkan, Türkiye olarak terör saldırıları nedeniyle çok sayıda vatandaşımız hayatını kaybetti. Terörizm nedeniyle ağır bedeller ödedik.
Distinguished Chairperson, as Turkey, many of our citizens lost their lives due to terrorist attacks. And as a country, we paid a heavy price because of terrorism.
Bu kayıplarımızın acısı bize bir takım sorumluluklar yüklemektedir. Teröristleri durdurmalı ve suçları adaletin önüne çıkarmalıyız.
The pain of such kind of losses are burdening us with some responsibilities. We must bring the perpetrators in front of justice.
Terörizm mağdurlarını desteklemek ve adalete erişimlerini sağlamak için sivil toplum örgütlerinin rolünü teşvik etmeliyiz.
We must encourage the role of non-governmental organizations to support the victims of terrorism and ensure they have access to justice.
Bu bağlamda terörizm mağdurları hakkında karar tasarısını sunduğu için Sayın Lopatka'ya teşekkür ediyoruz. Tasarıyı destekliyoruz.
In this regard, we would like to thank Mr. Lopatka for presenting the draft resolution on victims of terrorism and we fully support the bill.
Ancak bu arada iki meslektaşımın belirtmiş olduğu görüşleriyle alakalı düşüncelerimi de belirtmek istiyorum.
And I would like to express my thoughts about what my former previous two colleagues have said.
Türkiye olarak İslami terör terimini reddediyoruz.
As Turkey, we reject the concept of Islamic terrorism.
Terörün dininin, ırkının olmadığını düşünüyoruz. Nereden gelirse gelsin lanetliyoruz.
We don't believe that terrorism has a certain race or a certain religion, and we condemn all forms of terrorism.
Ayrıca Karabağ konusu terörizm ile nasıl bağdaştırılıyor bunu da anlamak mümkün değildir.
And it's impossible to understand how do you make a connection between the Karabakh issue and the terrorism.
Öte yandan Sayın Lopatka ile yapmış olduğumuz yapıcı ve açıklayıcı görüşmemizin neticesinde karar tasarısının 9. paragrafına verdiğimiz değişiklik önergesini geri çekmeye karar verdik. Söz konusu paragrafı ilk sunulduğu şekliyle kabul ediyoruz. Sayın Lopatka'ya da teşekkür ediyorum. Hepinize teşekkür ediyorum.
On the other hand, as a result of our constructive and explanatory conversations with Mr. Lopatka, we decided to withdraw the amendment motion we gave for the 9th paragraph of the draft resolution. We may accept the paragraph in question as it was originally presented. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Does anyone wish to speak against Amendment 2? What is Mr. Lopatka's opinion of the amendment?
Yeah, as my colleague from Turkey mentioned it, we had fruitful discussions, and so Turkey withdraw the amendment, and we can continue as it was proposed by our committee. Thank you.
Thank you. I should now put Amendment 2 to the vote. Will those in favor of Amendment 2 please raise your yellow voting card?
Sorry, the Turkish withdraw the amendment. We have not to vote, I think. The Turkish delegation
I'm
withdraw.
sorry, I misunderstood. I must recognize Turkey. Turkey, would you like to withdraw?
Geri çekmek istediğimizi söyledik. Teklifi geri çekiyoruz.
Yes, we already said that we would like to withdraw, so we are withdrawing our motion.
Thank you. My mistake. Turkey has withdrawn the amendment. We will now vote on paragraph 9. Anyone against paragraph 9, please raise your yellow placard. Those in favor, raise your yellow placard, please. Thank you. Any abstentions? Paragraph 9 is agreed to. There are no amendments to paragraphs 10 through 23. We'll take them together. Does anyone want a separate vote on any of these paragraphs? So we'll now take paragraphs 10 to 23 together. Those in favor, please raise your yellow placard. Thank you. Those against? Any abstentions? Paragraphs 10 to 23 are agreed to. I now call on Mr. Vesey from the United States to propose Amendment 3, which adds a new paragraph after paragraph 23. Mr. Vesey, you're recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Hudson. I urge the adoption of this amendment calling on participating states to address domestic terrorism targeted at groups based on ethnic background, race, sex, sexual orientation, gender identity, age, religion, political affiliation, or citizenship status. In addition to condemning terrorist acts, member states and its citizens would greatly benefit from a plan of action to quell domestic terrorism, which is why my amendment includes the adoption of an OSCE anti-discrimination, equity, and inclusion plan. We all know that the rise of domestic terrorism across the OSCE region and around the world should be great concern for all of us. In our own country, domestic terrorist attacks have dramatically increased in recent years. And I can think of multiple attacks that have taken place in places of worship, grocery stores, concerts, festivals, public transportation, just all within the last few years. And I hope my amendment will be adopted and that the OSCE region can start the process towards healing and understanding as we take the important step of decisively addressing domestic terrorism in the world. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you. Does anyone wish to speak against Amendment 3? What is Mr. Lopatka's opinion of the amendment?
As my colleague Mark Vesey mentioned, this amendment I think is very important. We have to also see this domestic terrorism which is rising. We have seen it recently in Norway, and therefore I'm absolutely in favor of this amendment.
Thank you. I shall now put Amendment 3 to the vote. Will all those in favor of Amendment 3 please raise your yellow voting card? Thank you. All those against, please raise your yellow voting card. Are there any abstentions? Amendment 3 is adopted. There are no amendments to paragraph 24 to 38. We will take them together. Does anyone want a separate vote on any of these paragraphs? So we will take paragraphs 24 to 38 together. Those in favor, please raise your yellow placard. Thank you. Those against, please raise your yellow placard. Are there any abstentions? Paragraphs 24 to 38 are agreed to. I propose that we now formally move to a vote on the draft resolution. Would those in favor of adopting the draft resolution please raise their voting cards? Thank you. Would those against please raise your voting card? Thank you. Are there any abstentions? The draft resolution is adopted. We will now move to consideration of the first supplementary item referred to us by the Standing Committee, the Arctic region, which is supplementary item number 10. There's one amendment to this item. I give the floor to Ms. Haraldsdottir from Iceland, the sponsor of this draft resolution. Ms. Haraldsdottir, you have the floor for 5 minutes. You're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Dear colleagues, by submitting a resolution on the Arctic region, I want to stress the importance of the OSCE PA paying closer attention to the Arctic and increasing its focus on the region. The Assembly tends to focus mainly on the southern and eastern part of the OSCE area and has, to my best knowledge, only twice passed resolution on the Arctic, in 2010 and 2013. During these almost 10 years, a lot have changed in the Arctic. The Arctic region is warming up 4 times as fast as other regions in the world. The ice caps are melting in the Arctic, and the region is becoming the target for rivalry. The Arctic Ocean is acidifying faster than the rest of the global oceans, which threatens the entire ecosystem that the ocean supports. The Arctic region's summer sea could disappear entirely as early as 2035. Dear colleagues, what is happening in the Arctic does not stay in the Arctic. It goes beyond and has effect on the rest of the world. All 8 Arctic states are members of the OSCE, but that is the United States of America, Canada, Iceland, Norway, Sweden, Finland, Kingdom of Denmark, and Russia. I want to use this opportunity to thank our President, Mr. Satterfield, for appointing me as a special representative for the Arctic. It is also important, the recent work by the Assembly, but in 2018, the Norwegian delegation invited the Presidium to Svalbard, and in following the Presidium decided on special representative of the Arctic, my predecessor, Mr. Toril Eidsheimer from Norway, who did a fantastic job. I want to mention my report that lies before this meeting, and in front of this hall, I have a short visual report on a screen. But about this supplementary item, I believe it's important for us to increase focus on the Assembly on the gravity of the issues facing the region. From the end of the Cold War, the Arctic has been a region of peace, stability, and constructive cooperation. It is of utmost importance that the Arctic remains a low-tension, peaceful area with minimal militarization and governed by international law. Russia has for years been prioritizing on building up a military defense system on the northern frontier. I have no trust in Russia and their understanding on defense, because no one, except maybe themselves, have extreme military system there. The Arctic region is governed in a cooperative manner, primarily throughout the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea. The changing climate and resulting opening of the sea routes, easier access to natural resources, and possible security threats resulting from increased traffic in the area poses new challenges. The Arctic's regional challenges have global implications. Correspondingly, international interest in the region is increasing. Multilateral, political, and academic attention is growing, as well as business interest. The resolution urged OSCE participating states to maintain focus on the Arctic and to recognize the impact that the climate crisis has on Arctic communities and the planet as a whole. Moreover, the resolution takes note of the increasing military importance and geopolitical strategy role of the Arctic to global issues. It acknowledged the impact that the security situation in Europe has already had on Arctic cooperation, including suspension of the work of the Arctic Council. This resolution condemns Russian unprovoked invasion of Ukraine and notes its grave impediments to international cooperation, including in the Arctic. And finally, I want to mention to you, interested in the Arctic, that the biggest Arctic conference, Arctic Circle, is held in October every year in Reykjavik, and I would very much like to welcome you all there. Thank you.
Thank you. The floor is now open for debate. The time limit for speeches is 3 minutes. If there are a lot of members wishing to speak, I may reduce the time limit to try to accommodate as many people as possible. I will now give the floor to Ms. Yvonne Jones of Canada. You are recognized for 3 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And on behalf of the Canadian delegation, I want to thank my colleague from Iceland for this supplementary item on the Arctic. I commend her openness to cooperation and dialogue with the OSCE Parliamentary Assembly. The Arctic represents 75% of Canada's coastline and 40% of our landmass. So it is tremendously important to us as a nation and a people. My family has lived for generations in Canada's northern region, and it is the area that I represent today in Canada's Parliament. Canada's Arctic and subarctic is home to many Indigenous cultures, most dominated by Inuit. I am an Indigenous Inuit woman who lives the reality of climate impact on people and communities in Arctic regions. I am pleased to see the supplementary item recognize that climate change is by far the most important issue in the Arctic. This issue has impacts on all aspects of security in the region and acts as a threat catalyst. For example, climate is having a rapid impact on our Arctic ecosystems. Canada is warming faster than other parts of the world, and where I live, in northern Canada, it is warming at more than double the global rate. Thawing permafrost, diminishing sea ice are impacting transportation routes, food security, and affordability. It's altering maritime geography and leading to alterations to the strategic landscape of the Arctic. Military experts have contended that increased access to Arctic shipping routes could definitely see growth, and NATO has expressed concern about Russia's increased military presence in the Arctic, which we've all been witness to. So you can see our concern. Our concern is increasingly becoming a region of climate change will also mean it impacts international trade and global security interests. They all intersect. We also know that growing competition and increased access to the north of the Arctic Circle leads to both Arctic and non-Arctic states expressing a variety of interests in the region. It can lead to tensions in the Arctic, including the current international security situation. So it is all more important to work together effectively to ensure the Arctic remains a zone of peace and stability. And therefore, it is important to support the rules-based international order in the Arctic. I want to thank my colleague from Iceland for highlighting the importance of the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea. I applaud her recommendation, and I look forward to more discussion around it. I also believe that the supplementary item appropriately addresses the variety of challenges that faces Arctic regions in the world, and I'm very pleased to support this, and I encourage other delegates to do the same.
Thank you. I will now recognize Mr. Antonio Gomez Reino of Spain. You are recognized for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. President. Gracias. Voy a hablar en castellano. Creo que si hay una amenaza presente y futura, ya no para la seguridad y la estabilidad de nuestros planetas, sino probablemente para nuestra propia existencia como especie en este planeta, pues es evidentemente el cambio climático. La era actual, el antropoceno, está suponiendo, a pesar de que hay todavía quien sigue con ese negacionismo contra toda evidencia científica, significa o está significando, en palabras del IPCC de Naciones Unidas, el impacto más catastrófico no solo para los ecosistemas y su equilibrio, sino también para nuestra vida. Pero cabe que preguntarnos al respecto de esta importante moción que traen hoy aquí a debate, ¿qué significaría el deshielo del Ártico? Significaría, en primer lugar, evidentemente, una subida importantísima del nivel del mar en las costas de todos nuestros países, significaría movimientos masivos de gente que evidentemente tendría que buscar un entorno acabando sus ecosistemas de vida, por lo tanto millones de refugiados climáticos, significaría una alteración del ciclo hídrico y extraordinarias dificultades también para conseguir agua dulce y, en definitiva, cambios extremos en el clima de consecuencias impredecibles pero seguro dramáticas. Y fíjense además, se lo dice alguien que viene de una delegación que está en la frontera sur europea, donde vemos que, pues precisamente por los efectos que está teniendo ya en África y en Sahel el cambio climático, miles de personas suben hacia el norte intentando, evidentemente, pues buscar un sitio donde vivir. Evidentemente, además, y hay que decirlo, lo hacen, a nuestro juicio, pues con toda legitimidad. Y hay que decirlo, además, la dramática guerra que el señor Putin ha motivado con la invasión a Ucrania ha tenido un efecto especialmente perverso también en este asunto, porque de alguna forma ha arrinconado el debate climático. No solo lo ha arrinconado, sino que hay quien ahora nos está diciendo que hay que volver a quemar carbón, que hay que quemar más petróleo, en vez de afrontar el enorme desafío que tenemos como civilización, que es afrontar el cambio climático. Y si hablamos, además, del deshielo del Ártico, creo que hay que hacerse una pregunta en un órgano como este. ¿Cómo puede ser que haya países que de forma explícita o implícita se estén inhibiendo de sus responsabilidades para combatir el cambio climático precisamente porque quieren acceder a los recursos que hay debajo del Ártico? Acabo ya. Simplemente decirles, ayer hubo, precisamente en otro país, en Italia, la caída directa de un glaciar en la Marmolada, en los Dolomitas, en los Alpes, que es una fotografía de época que evidentemente creo que es muy clara de a lo que nos enfrentamos. Y en definitiva, creo que si hablamos de seguridad, se ha dicho también, se ha hablado del permafrost, salimos de una pandemia, el deshielo y el permafrost puede liberar también nuevos virus que podrían ser hipotéticamente muy peligrosos para la seguridad y en definitiva creo que luchar contra el deshielo en el Ártico y contra el cambio climático es en el tiempo presente una de las mejores contribuciones que tenemos y podemos hacer a la estabilidad y a la seguridad de nuestros países y en definitiva de este planeta.
Thank you. I will now recognize Ms. Patricia Berry of Canada. You're recognized for 3 minutes. I'm sorry, Bovey. My handwriting is atrocious.
Thank you, and not to worry. And I thank Ms. Harold's daughter for this resolution on the Arctic region. The Arctic region is of great importance and concern for Canada. As you've heard, 40% of our landmass bordered by the Arctic Ocean. The principles of this resolution will positively affect the livelihoods of Canada's Arctic people, including food security and our physical security. Canada's Arctic and Northern Policy Framework and the Senate of Canada's Special Arctic Report underline the need to strengthen rules-based international order in the Arctic and in the Arctic's institutions. Indigenous participation in all discussions and forums is critical. Climate change at more than twice the global rate, the melting of permafrost and the diminishing of ice in the Arctic Ocean and Northwest Passage are changing the dynamics of shipping and security. With the Russian invasion of Ukraine, the security of the Arctic is of increasing concern. Russia has stated its intention to deter foreign aggression in the Arctic and is increasing their armed forces. Our 3 northern territories have all voiced very real concern regarding Arctic sovereignty, their vulnerability, and the changing Arctic order. The UN Convention of the Law of the Sea is critical. OSCPA cannot deny or ignore these changes. We must maintain vigilance of the Arctic and monitor multilateral engagement, military capabilities, resources, and economic development. All this affects Canada and other nations bordering the Arctic Ocean, their peoples, and Indigenous sovereignty. I congratulate Iceland, and I will be voting for this resolution on the Arctic region and for the continuance of UN's Convention of the Law of the Sea. Canada is a signatory of this convention. It is of great importance for our northern coast, as it is for our eastern and western coasts. Thank you, and I thank Iceland again.
Thank you, Ms. Bovey. We have reached the end of the debate on this supplementary item. We will begin consideration of the amendment tomorrow morning, followed by the debate on our final supplementary item and the election of committee officers. The speaking list for the third supplementary item is available in the table office. The agenda for tomorrow will be available shortly. Dear colleagues, thank you. We've had a very productive debate and appreciate your interventions. And for a third time, we will conclude on time, maybe a little bit ahead of schedule. Thank you. We stand adjourned.